What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Heart and Soul. Today, I am joined by Sarah Bragg, who is a podcaster, an author, a communicator, wife, and mom. And she's on a mission to help you know that you are never alone and to provide you with resources to help you survive where you are right now. And this month, actually, she is releasing a book called Is Everyone Happier Than Me? Which is a great title. An honest guide to the questions that keep you up at night. So, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me, Sarah.
I'm so happy to meet you and be here.
Yeah. So, where do you live? Where are you coming from?
I am coming from East Tennessee. So it's Cleveland is the city. If you know where Chattanooga is, I'm just like a rock's throw from there. So
Okay. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina, so I do know that this side of the country a little bit better.
Yes, yes. We're on at least the same time zone. Of course, everybody that thinks that I'm central time zone because of Nashville, it just throws everybody off. But
Oh yeah,
I'm with you on the Eastern time zone. I'm
we're
with
on
you.
the East Coast, baby. East Coast,
Yep.
best coast.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe.
maybe, I don't know. Well, yes, thanks so much for joining me. I did some research on you and I really love your story and how you model your mission. And I would love for you to give my listeners a chance to hear a little bit more about who you are. So why don't you just start by letting them know a little more about who you are and what you do and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. Well, I am smack dab. I feel like in the middle of midlife. I'm 45 and I have two teenage girls. So we are in the thick of raising teenagers, which is very different from raising little kids. I was very exhausted when they were little, and now I feel like I'm very exhausted when they're older. They
Oh
keep
no.
wanting to sit like at 10:30 at night. I'm like, I'm kind of ready to like shut it down. And someone plops down on my bed and they're like, just like unloading. And I'm like, okay, but can you like do this at like 4 p.m. when, I'm
Seriously.
ready for it? Never. But anyways, so Scott and I have been married 18 years. And gosh, we just moved to Tennessee 3 years ago. It was COVID time, like everybody, I feel like worlds just got kind of turned upside down. We lived in Atlanta for really, it feels like my whole adult life I spent in Atlanta. And so Atlanta still feels a little bit like home, even though I grew up here in East Tennessee. But we came back home to be near my family. And so we live on property now, kind of went from city living to country living and have dipped our toes into owning horses. And we could do a whole like episode on what I learned from owning horses. Gosh, I was very ignorant about owning horses. I host a podcast. I've been on a creative break for a couple of years, and I've just kind of launched it back at the end of 2023. But I've been in this world of talking to people and doing life with people and just navigating life for many many years as a speaker and a writer and a podcaster. And through it all, I love coming alongside specifically women and just like going, gosh, I see you. Like, we're just in this together. Like, this is not easy. I know everything that I feel like I've read or I look at online makes it seem like this is supposed to be really easy. And it's just not. It's not at all. And so everything I do is kind of with that message. So, gosh, I mean, we could probably have a whole podcast also on like just my timeline of getting here. I feel like it's just been just one thing after the next that led to really kind of this platform where I exist. But yeah, that's kind of just a snapshot of me. It's just I love to write, I love people,
Yeah.
and I do a lot of different things along the way.
I love that. Um, you got me a little scared about raising kids. I have a 2.5-year-old and I'm exhausted.
Yes. Well, it's
Just
what
the fact
there's
that
these
I'm just
well,
gonna
these
be more
teenage
tired.
years. Is it a boy or a girl?
As a boy.
Okay. Well, my husband keeps like even last night he's like, I just wish I knew what it was like to have boys. Like there's just so many words that are being spoken all the time right now. So with all
Girls
the girls,
girls can talk.
they have no shortage of words. And often I'm like, I just feel like my ears hurt. There's just so many words happening. No, but this age is really fun. Like it's fun to be able to like they have humor and you get to make jokes, but you're just not everything's just different. It's heavy like it is when they're little and you're chasing and you're like always like vigilant. Like, are they about to fall in the water? Are they like you're just
Yeah.
always on guard? you're just on guard in different like ways, very like mental and emotional because you kind of got to keep your like act together. Like it's like, oh yeah, no big deal. Oh, somebody wants to have sex. Oh, whatever. Which is fine. It's fine. Let's just not talk. Just like
Yeah,
you're like
trying to
they're
keep it cool.
throwing yes, big things that you got to keep your cool. So don't be scared. It's great. It's just it's hard too. They're all hard.
Yes, I will survive. We
You will
women have
survive.
survived forever.
That's right. That's
We're
right.
gonna make it. So what got you to this place where you decided to write a book called Everyone Is Everyone Happier Than Me? Were you in like a kind of a dark place, or were you just like
Yes.
kind of in comparison
Well,
paralysis
and I
analysis?
hinted at that like season where I was on sort of a creative hiatus from my podcast. I had started Surviving Sarah in 2015. So I was sort of like a grandma podcaster. Like it came out so long ago. And I just got to the point where I was feeling burnt out.
Yeah.
And we came out of 2020. And in that same year, I launched my first book is was called A Mother's Guide to Raising Herself. And that book I wrote during the shutdown. Like my kids are home from school, so we're teaching them at home. We are living in 1,200 square feet on top of each other. And so I write that book in the middle of all of that. Then we move states and then I have to launch that book while getting my girls in new schools. And I just was so tired and exhausted. And, at that point, I was 42, turning 43. And it was just like everything that I knew to be true seemed to be upside down and going. I mean, even when it comes to, and I'm sure many of your listeners will relate to this, like body stuff, like all of a sudden my body changed at 42 and I was like, what? We've never had an issue with this before. Like you've always operated. Like if I want to lose weight, I can lose weight. If I want to get fit, I can. Like, it was like all these things. And it was like I was flooded with all the insecurities I had when I was going through puberty, just like a
Mm.
middle school girl, I felt like. And so I knew I was supposed to write another book. I knew, but I just wasn't really sure. And as I started getting curious about what that might be, I really placed all the feelings that I was feeling at the moment on like a giant post-it note. And I mean, it was just all like sad and lonely and overwhelmed and insecure. It was all of those kind of feelings. There was no like happy, peaceful, content. None of those were on the page. And as I started just thinking about that, I was like, I feel like there's a lot of us in this season of life, whether you're in your mid 40s or in your 30s, anytime where you kind of look around and you're like, is this all this is? Like, is this all
Yeah.
there is? And I realized I just need to write about where I am right now because I think there's probably a lot of people out there that are feeling the same things, that are waking up in the middle of the night, wrestling with some sort of worry or fear, or, do I matter? Like asking these questions. Is everybody happy? Is everyone happier than me? Or does anybody like me? That's another one. Like you replay the day in your head and you're like, gosh, I don't think anybody likes me. And
Mm.
so that's really where the book came from because I may not have, a three-step process for people, but I do feel like I had some things to share of like, well, here's how I'm navigating this. And
Yeah.
this is what is helping me in this season. So maybe try it for yourself. And that's really how this book came out.
Yeah, and sometimes those like three-step process books, like 10 ways to heal your body or
Right.
whatever, they can almost be discouraging in a sense because it's like, well, what if I follow the 10 steps or the 3 steps and I'm still where I'm at? It's almost
Exactly.
better to have someone share their perspective and like help the reader feel less alone instead of feeling like, well, if you do this, you'll be better. But what if that doesn't work? You
Right.
know, like I would much rather think like, I'm 35. I would much rather read about someone who's 35 who's feeling the same things as I am, knowing that I'm not alone. And, like, I'm not
Exactly.
crazy for maybe feeling down in the dumps or confused about this transition or not what everyone says I should be feeling on social media. So, I think that's actually a better, like, self-help type of book is to
Yeah.
actually share where you're at.
Yes, absolutely. I know. Well, when
Yeah.
you look on social media, I mean, that's really, and you think, oh, I guess like it's kind of what you were saying. I guess this is how I'm supposed to feel. Everybody seems to be doing great and they have this perfect family and this perfect life. And you're like, and mine is not. So what is wrong with me? Instead of like, we just, let's be honest and like pull the curtain back a little bit and
Yeah.
reveal how we're really feeling about things.
Totally. And I think like I know I've had conversations with friends where I even would put they're like good friends of mine, like in my church or in my group, in my like close group of friends who I will put their family on a pedestal thinking like, oh my gosh, like they have it all together. Like she packs her lunches perfect and like all that I see on social media. But then I'll go out to coffee with that mom one day and I'll hear like, all that actually is going on,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it makes me feel comforted. Okay, I'm not the only one who's, like, feeling like I'm on a hamster wheel just trying to survive. Like,
Exactly.
we kind of put other people on a pedestal because social media is basically our lives so much. We spend so much time on it, and so we can convince ourselves that we're not enough or we're not doing enough and everyone else is doing better than we are, when in reality, we're all just trying to survive, and life
Yeah.
is like that. It's a roller coaster, unfortunately, like, you kind of wish it was like this uphill, like, every decade gets better, but you're gonna go up and then you're gonna go back down, and you're gonna go up and you're gonna go back down, and just when you think your body's consistent, you're gonna hit
Exactly.
40 and, it's like or you're gonna have a baby and everything,
Yes.
like, it's wild. There's no
Yes.
consistency. I think that's the one consistent thing about life.
You got it. We can end this podcast right there. That
Yes,
was that
and
was
goodbye, and adios.
right.
Um So there were a few things that I read about you that really stuck out to me. And one was that you talk about a lot about this in between phase, which we kind of just touched on, but I'd love for you to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that. Like you specifically use the term like how to thrive in the in between, and something that I like to say is like we're always in the messy middle. Like just when we think we've arrived, we're there's another middle we gotta get through.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I'd love for you to kinda just expand more on what thriving in the in between actually looks like.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think we always can look up and find ourselves in the middle. I think, when you were talking, I was thinking, and you have a toddler, I was thinking how often I thought, okay, we finally figured it out. And then, like, they're sleeping through the night, and then they would get sick or start teething. And you're like, what is happening? We're
Yeah,
back at square one. And we don't know how we're going to get forward. And so, I feel like circumstances sort of have a way of ushering us into that in between season. I know that to be very true for myself. I can look back at after in my 20s, in my like working so hard and being so driven and getting places, and then hitting 30 and having my first child. And that coincided with getting let go from a job where I thought, well, this is it, and this is where I'm going to be, and this is what I'm going to do. And I just remember thinking, like, well, now what? Like, here
yeah,
I am, and I don't know. I know what was behind, and I know where I'm standing here, but I don't know what's next, and feeling very lost in that in between part. I felt it again all those years later, and most recently, the same sort of thing, feeling burnout from all the work I was doing, then my body changing and raising teenagers, and all of a sudden sort of feeling like, gosh, things have changed again. And now sort of standing in that in between and not sure what the next stage looks like for me. Um, and so for me, I really just sort of learned that in those are the years, instead of just dreading that in between, learning to figure out how to survive and thrive in that in between. And that sort of looked like for me becoming very introspective, like starting to get curious of going, okay, well, this is the time to figure out what I might want to do next or what might be. And so I mean, for the first time, it took like 5 years of that in between. I was 30. I didn't have the idea for surviving Sarah until 5 years later. And that really set me on the next path of like, okay, here's where I'm going and this is what I'm doing. I have energy. But there was 5 years of getting curious and reading a lot of books and journaling a lot and just kind of asking myself questions of what I want to do and what I love to do, and just sort of having my eyes open. It was frustrating and it was long, um, but I think it's a time to get curious. And then I think it's a time to just, I don't know, be happy about what you do have. So acknowledging the good that is in this in between instead
Yeah.
of focusing on what is so hard. I practice in my first book, the first book, A Mother's Guide to Raising Herself. I really every chapter is a phrase that I would teach my girls and realized, oh, I sort of really need to teach myself this. So
Yeah.
it's really about how I grew up. And one of the phrases is, what made you smile today? And I realized that in these in between times, coming back to that gratitude piece of being able to go, well, what made me smile today? Gosh, look at this good. Like, look at this around me. Even if it was like, gosh, that coffee was so good. Like, let's look, make it so small. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be happy that, I got rejected from this professional friendship, it doesn't have to be that, but we can find some sort of good. And I think just changing our perspective on those things really does help you to sustain well during this in between time period.
Yeah. That's really funny that you bring that up. Have you ever heard of like my one word, like for the new
Yes.
year?
Yeah.
So my word for this year is perspective. And it is to have like more of those moments of like, okay, sometimes I can get so caught up in like the doom and gloom or like what I'm lacking or what is missing from my life or what I've just lost. And there's like so much goodness, tiny, even micro moments right in front of me. And I really just like want this year to be about like mini perspective shifts that eventually like change like my heart posture in general.
Absolutely. And I think it comes in those small moments. And I'm just gonna like, for me, I sit down with my journal. I don't even do it every day, but I do it several days a week, and I just write the words thankful for. And then I just try to think back to the day before of the small things that just really made me smile
Mm,
on that day. And it does help, and I think that perspective is such a key thing in the middle of these in between times. For me, I feel like I'm probably in that perimenopause. I feel like we're hearing that word now all the time everywhere, or it might just be my algorithm. I don't know, but I'm seeing it everywhere. But I feel like I was telling someone the other day, I was like, this perimenopause is just like puberty. Like, for my girls, when they have been gone through puberty, it was like a few years and you're just like, oh my goodness, like, will this ever end? But it does. And
mhm.
so I keep telling myself, it won't always be this way. And that's a
Yeah.
phrase that we can help with our perspective and everything, to go this season where my body is like going through puberty again and going, I don't know what's happening. Who are you? Like, what is this? It won't always be that way. And it's shifting our perspective to go, it's just this season. It is a middleness, it is the in between, but it won't always be this way. I think that keeping that in mind, you're like what you're saying about perspective, is really the key to being able to thrive well in the middle of this weird season.
Yeah. I remember when, my son was born and I'd never had a kid before, so everything was new
Amateur, we don't know, right?
and scary and
Yep.
like life altering. And we were like maybe 3 months in, I was really struggling with just I'm a very like prepared person and you can't really prepare much for motherhood.
Yep.
Like, you
Yep.
can do what as much as you can, and then to a point, it's like every kid is different, you know? And I was really struggling with, like, that, like, not being able to control the situation. I really struggled with, a little postpartum depression, to be
Yes.
honest.
Same.
And I remember we met my husband and I, like, met via Zoom with some friends of ours back in Texas, where we're from, who had 3 kids, and we were like, "This sucks." Like, why did you keep doing it? Like,
Yes.
why
Right.
did you keep having more? And I remember the mom said, like, "Right now, everything that you're experiencing feels like a black hole. Like, you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel because 'cause you've never gotten to the light." She said, "But after once he starts sleeping through the night, then it's gonna be like, you all of a sudden forget about like those sleepless nights, or once they
Right.
start smiling at you, then it's like, oh, it's like worth it to have the cries. And these little mini milestones that we hadn't hit yet, she was like, those are actually are what gonna propel you forward to want to have more kids, because you know in your second kid, it's actually mentally a lot easier because
Yes.
you're like, "Okay, this ends in 4 months."
Exactly.
Or
It's so
this is
true.
it's that perspective of like, I know that this isn't forever. This season is not gonna be forever. And I remember being in a dark place, but I also remember getting out of it at this time,
Yes.
and that's coming
Yes.
too.
Yeah, and I can remember it was probably a couple years ago, and so my youngest, she must have been 12 at the time, was just in the thick of that puberty and that in between, and I was saying that to her, just going, "It won't always be this way." And it's helpful for me, just like what you're saying, because I could look at my oldest and go, "Oh my gosh, the death trap that 8th grade is, I didn't think we were gonna ever survive it, but we did." And
Uh-huh.
she's like came out of this like odd funk and you're like, "Oh, look at you, nice human. Welcome to the earth." And so I can look
Welcome
at
to
my
Earth.
like right, my youngest and go, "Okay, it won't always be this way. I know it feels like it is, but I promise it won't always be this way." And I don't think any of us love like, it doesn't make sense, I think, sometimes in the moment when someone says that to us, but I do think if we can continue to remind ourselves of that, it's very true. It won't always be this way.
Yeah.
It will not always be this hard.
Yeah. Um, Sometimes too, you get to the other side and you're already on the other side and you forget that you overcame something because you're
Oh,
into the
yeah.
next thing, you forget. You're
Exactly.
like, oh, I forgot that I was like so sad in that in between because I'm already in this next
Yes.
in between.
I appreciate that about like because I do keep journals and so at the end of the year I'll look back and read all the posts and I'm like, oh, I forgot that I was really knee deep in that. And because I
Yeah.
had moved on to the next thing I was knee deep in and moving on. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
very true.
Had did going back to your new book is Everyone Happier Than Me. Did writing it feel healing for you in that area of your life, or I guess therapeutic in some way?
Yeah, it definitely felt therapeutic to tell all these stories. It was funny once I wrote it all out and I turned it in. I was like, gosh, I felt really good. And then I started getting the edits back
Yeah.
and we were in the next phase and I was reading it and I was going, "Oh my gosh, who let me say these things?" Like and I was talking to my therapist about it and she's like, "Well, it's cuz it really sounds like you just laid out all of your therapy sessions into a book for the world to read." I'm like, "You're right. That's so now we're in like this is scary. I just was really honest and said all these things that I'm feeling and working through." But there was such it just felt so good to speak those out. I think sometimes we keep a lot tucked into our minds
Yeah.
and we don't tell anyone the things that we're struggling with or the things that we're walking through because it's vulnerable and that's scary to share out loud, that sharing it out loud really is therapeutic. Not everyone needs to share it out loud for like, lots of people to read in a book. But just sharing it out loud in your journal even or to a friend, like you calling your friend over Zoom and talking like that, like any of those things is really therapeutic. So yeah, so it was very therapeutic to share this part of my life.
Are there any I love I love after where it says an honest guide to questions that keep you up at night. Are there, because I'm that person. I cannot turn my brain off at night and have such a hard time sleeping, because even last night I woke up at like 12:45 to pee, and
Then
it's
you're awake.
1:45 and I'm thinking, I don't even know. I've gone down rabbit trails in my
Yes.
head and I'm like, why am I still up right now?
Yes.
Um, are there any questions that are currently keeping you up at night right
Oh
now?
my goodness. I'm thankful that some of them I have, no pun intended, put to bed. I don't worry about anymore. But I think the biggest one that's probably plaguing me now is, well, have I lost my sparkle? Like, is
Mm,
that it's that question of like, does anybody see me? Like, I think, gosh, wrestling through the 40s of aging, and I think probably so much of it is my personality. Um, but that's definitely the one that keeps me up at night the most is that, which you can probably relate to a lot and your listeners too, given what your podcast based on, but that worth piece and how
Yeah.
that's connected to all the years that I've spent thinking where worth comes from and your bodies and all this. So that those still I've done so much work. I just met with my therapist yesterday and she's like, "You're in a really good place and you have come so far on this, but I'm still, in process." But so
Oh, we
that one
all are.
still,
Yeah.
yeah, so that one still keeps me up at night. But magnesium helps a lot with that.
Yeah. I was gonna say melatonin,
Yeah.
magnesium. There are
Yeah.
drugs for that.
Yeah.
Um, but honestly, it's kind of like ironic. And sorry, my dog's like behind me, and he's having like a major dream. Speaking of keeping you
Speaking
up
of
at
sleep,
night,
he's no trouble.
he's
Right.
sleeping great. He's like grunting in his sleep.
That's hilarious.
No, I think it's kind of ironic and cool that one of the questions that still keeps you up at night is, does anyone see me? When your book was written to help others feel seen.
I know.
It's just kind
I
of like
know.
that. I mean, that's really neat actually, to be like, you're wondering, does anyone see me, while all these people are reading your book and they're feeling seen. And that should be
Yes.
something that like affirms you in a way of like,
Mm.
wow, I'm living out my calling, and there's purpose in this in between right now.
Thank you for saying that. That is a really great, and that's, it's that's really the heart behind it. I have such a desire for people to feel seen. Um, and I've learned that I do feel like people feel seen if any of us are willing to go first and kind of lay ourselves out a little bit to be seen
Yeah.
as real as we are. That is how we all feel seen
Yeah.
when someone does
Uh,
that first.
our slogan for this podcast and for my business is shameless living. And that's what it means. It's like, the more you're unashamed of like who you are, where you're at, where you've been, your story, and you are vulnerable with that, then it allows other people to not feel shame, because it just frees them up. Like, it takes their chains off to be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm not alone. Like, someone else has been through this or is going through this. Like, I'm not the only one."
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's what we need. Because I feel like, and even the heart of the book is everyone happier than me. It's like I had all those negative feelings, and then when I thought, how do I want to feel? Well, I want to feel happy. And as I started digging into that, I started realizing how really happiness is connected to connection.
Yeah.
That the more connected we are with ourselves and with others, the happier that we ultimately are. And so, really, it's about digging into this phase and finding that sense of connection and whatever that looks like, and in all these different tension points or questions that we wrestle with, how can we feel more connected to ourselves and connected to others, because that really is where happiness lie.
Yeah, amen. And you're doing that through not only your book, but your podcast. I'd love for you. I have 4 questions that I ask every
Okay.
guest, but before I
Yeah.
do that, I want you to talk a little bit more about your podcast
Yes.
and let my listeners know like where they can find it.
Absolutely. It's called Surviving Sarah. I started it. My oldest, Sinclair is her name, Sinclair, and she was 6, I believe, when I started it. And I was knee deep and I wanted to call it Surviving Sinclair because that's what I felt like I was doing on a daily basis. And I was like, oh, that might really send her to therapy. So I'm going to call it Surviving Sarah because ultimately I am surviving myself all the time. And so it's really just, there's a lot of just episodes with just me. There's a lot of conversational episodes with others about helping you survive, whether it's your life, your relationships, your work, or your faith. And so you can find it wherever you listen to your podcast.
Yeah, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. I think that if my listeners like this podcast, then they would definitely love that.
Yes.
It seems
Yes, I
very,
can tell by just talking with you, the conversational style, it's very similar, and I think your listeners would feel the same on my show
yeah.
too.
So definitely tune into her podcast and subscribe and rate us, y'all. Give us 5 stars. Come on.
Yes,
We
we need
love to
it.
see it. Don't give us 2 or 1 or 3
just
even.
just tuck those in your heart and think
Yeah,
it. Don't put it out there.
you can maybe send us an email on those, but give us 5 stars.
Right.
Okay, I have 4 questions that I
Okay.
ask every guest, so I'm gonna ask you those right now.
Okay.
What is something that you are currently obsessed with right now?
Okay. Okay. This this came to mind when you started the conversation based on where you live, but I am currently obsessed with Outlander. Have you watched that show?
I've heard of it.
Okay, the
I
only
haven't watched it.
I'm in a current season where they live in Wilmington, but it's like set
I
in
think
like
it's filmed here.
1770. It might be.
I
It
think
might
it
be.
is. Yeah.
That's genuinely where they live in like seasons like 4 through whatever. But I am knee deep into it and don't tell anybody, but I sucked my husband into it. He's like, please don't tell people I watched this with you. But sorry, just did. But
That's like when I'm watching like The Bachelor at night and my husband walks by and he's like, "It's so lame." And then like 2 seconds
exactly.
later, he's like,
He's like
"Hey,
sitting down
what
with
did
you
she
and
say?"
right.
I'm
That's
like,
exactly what happened.
I'm like, yeah, I know you love it.
Right.
Okay. Second question is, what is something that you're really looking forward to? Obviously your book, but something that
Obviously the
you're
book.
really looking forward to in 2024.
Okay, outside of the book, I am really looking forward to some future horse shows. So my daughter, oldest Sinclair, she rides horses. So she like is like English. So she jumps horses, that sort of thing. And so she has qualified for like next rounds, lead on her way to nationals. So I'm just
Cool.
really excited. We've got two big shows coming up in the spring. So I'm really excited about that for her.
That's awesome. My
Yep.
the girl who used to co-host this with me, Chelsea, my listeners know her. She grew up riding horses and she's
Ah,
like a big horse girl.
yes. Well, I could talk all the things that I've learned. And there's a lot of stories in that book about horses. So she might want to check that out and she can probably feel some of my pain on
Yeah.
horses.
Maybe. Okay, my next question is what's something that you really love about yourself right now?
Oh, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is because that's a hard question for me,
For all
given
women.
for all women, my knee deep in therapy that I'm working through. Um, I think it's my ability to play tennis. I played through college and then I hung my racket up for 20 years and I just picked it back up last spring and I have had the most fun. So I love this about myself that I allowed myself to look like a beginner again, like
Yeah, that's
and pick it
good.
back up and I'm just having so much fun with it. I've missed it. I was like, gosh, why did I hang that racket up for so long? But I'm having a lot of fun. So I'm proud of myself for, you know, I don't like to look uncool. And so picking up a racket, knowing like, oh, I was this star in tennis and I'm not going to be anymore, but doing that. I
Yeah.
really like that about myself right now.
I like that phrase, allow yourself to be a beginner again. That's good. Okay, last question is if you could leave my listeners with one little like post-it note of encouragement or truth to leave on their mirror or on their computer
Yep.
today, what would that be? Something short and sweet.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go to what my eye caught because I have literally a post-it note on I have a big window in front of me. So it's on the windowsill, but it says, be curious, be mindful, be you. So
I love
I
it.
think my mantra every day. I just want to be those things. Be curious, be mindful, and be you.
I love that. And it's actually on a post-it note on your
It's literally on a post-it note right here.
So that's great and tangible. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'm going to link all of your where people can buy your book, your podcast, and your like socials and everything in the show notes. But what's the best way to connect with you for those who are listening right now?
Yeah. Well, for sure, sarahbragg.com. That's SARAHBRAGG.com. I send out a monthly newsletter, which I love to write. I just do some humor and some funny gifts. But it's all the things that I've watched, read, and listened to that month. So it's just all the things that I loved. And so
Yeah.
that kind of helped me survive. And so if you go to that website, you can sign up for that. And I don't know, I love to connect with people there because they can respond to the emails and we can get to know each other. And so that's a great place.
That's awesome. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. And listeners, go buy her book and listen to her podcast.
Oh, thank you. It was just so great to meet you.
Yeah, you too. All right, listeners, I will talk to you next week. Bye.